Have a motion to accept the minutes, please.
So moved. Second.
So any comments on the minutes? I mean, several people weren't here last week, so we had a smaller group, so it was a relatively short meeting. So there was no action taken at that meeting. It was just reporting on the various meetings that we had. So I'm comfortable with this. Anybody else have any comments on the minutes? Okay, all in favor of accepting these minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
I'll
Right.
abstain since I didn't attend.
All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Charmaine and Nick. They've been working on, as a byproduct of the interim report and the conversations at the Board of Selectmen, there was a significant push to have a greater level of utilization on town facilities and town spaces. So they've been working for the last almost 2 months, a month and a half or so, thinking about it and putting together ideas. And Peter's been a resource so to help with this. So if we can turn it over to Charmaine and Nick to kind of explain where you are and the game plan.
Well, I think we all at that same meeting came to the conclusion that we needed more criteria. That the rating system really wasn't effective. So our decision was to do a deep dive on each property in all elements. I just, after reviewing IFMA and this schematic you had sent me, the outline and Nick's input, we were really getting, and hopefully I can get all the information, but I have 2 good sources so far, of putting all this information, including all infrastructure information, square footage, usage, age, material, the whole 9 yards. And it will also be a one-stop shop. If we can get all this information and we feel comfortable all of it is valid and current, that's the other issue, is the current side. I'm a little concerned. But maybe a discussion that I might have with Peter at some point in time once we've assembled all the info. Then we will put it together, and the other part of it is being connected to the people that are responsible for doing the reservations. Basically, those who are involved in knowing how often the rooms are used, how many people are using it, type of rooms, method of making the reservation, how often, all of that information. So part of it is building information, the other part of it is usage information. It's going to take a little time to assemble all this, but the ball is rolling on it. And the other part that is still outstanding, and Nick and I are going to start these conversations. I think once I do the first 2 properties, which is Senior Center and Memorial Hall, is that we're going to sit down and say, okay, how do we associate values to this? Because that's the next step. Because if we're going to rate it, then we have to have a criteria for the values associated with the information that we have. So that part has not been addressed yet. But I figured it probably would make more sense to address that as soon as we've got something tangible to work with in front of us and we start looking at the different categories. So it's basically 2 parts: assembling the criteria, or not criteria, but the factual information on the buildings and usage, and then working to establish a rating plan that everybody feels makes sense to them and that would accept the information. That's the other part. We want to do it in such a way that when somebody...
When you say rating, are you talking like quality of
Right,
the
remember we
space
were
or quality
starting
of the
about
furniture or that
the
kind of stuff?
criteria, well, the criteria that you established initially, usage, value, historical,
Also prioritization.
yeah, prioritization. It'll probably, the rating that we will do on the raw information, we'll probably try to transpose it into such a way that it fits into the format that you had provided us early on, the one that we initially used where they said, there's really nothing,
Yeah.
it looked a little bit too arbitrary or subjective.
And, you know, there's no pride of authorship on that. And if we think that's, should be tossed, I'd rather cut early and run quickly.
But
than
overall-
continue to go in
I think
another
it was a good
direction.
story.
But it's a
Yeah,
good
it's
start.
your thinking.
Yes.
Because they do have to be rated, they should be rated, because I think it could be rated in many, many ways, from who's the most flexible and can absorb more activity, who's maxed, you know, how can we share the wealth? There's a lot of ways, so,
Before you get there, though, I thought, as I looked at the documents that you had and that information, a couple things struck me. The first is that it seems that you really want to, this is if you look at everything, it'll take forever. So to me, it seems that you really want to just look at the public spaces of every building, and anything that's, you know, an office or a private or a storage space or something that's like an assigned space. I'm not sure we should even bother with that at this stage. Maybe that's something that you go down the road at, but you
Because
look.
we're trying to talk about public use.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to say, what's the utilization of the building?
Programming space.
Because basically anything that's like an office or anything like that, it's basically, it's committed and
Yeah.
it's used.
I totally agree with you
So-
on that, but I think the important thing though is if it's public usage, you still want to make sure it's safe.
Right, no, I completely
So there's a lot of
agree.
infrastructures that feed
Yeah,
into
no,
the
I think,
public.
so all I'm saying is that I would just triage down to what, like, for example, in the senior center, whether there may be 6 or 7 spaces out of the whole senior center that are
Right.
what you really should be looking at in terms of your criteria, number one. Number two, I think it would be good to, at least at a initial effort, try to put it in big blocks of utilization. You know, morning, afternoon, evening,
Yes, that's a key.
day of the week, you know, kind of thing, rather than trying to go by hour or try to get too detailed, you know, so we get, you know, because then if you can then triage before you get to the rating system, reconcile why some spaces are more used than others. Is it geography? Is it because of amenities? Is it because of accessibility? What are the criteria that are driving those spaces to be more used than others? And it may be, you know, and because my biggest concern is, I think I just wrote in my note, is that, you know, most organizations tend to build space for a peak, you know, and there's certain times of the day or certain times of the week and everybody
Season,
wants to
yeah.
use the space. So, you know, I can't tell you how many college campuses built more classroom space because they wanted to be able to have more classrooms between more, you know, everybody wanted to have, all the professors wanted to run their class between 10 and 11:30
Yeah.
on Tuesday and Thursday.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the rest of the campus was wide open, all the, you know. And so how do you kind of organize it in that way, I guess is my, you know, can you triage it out so that ultimately, once you get to that kind of information, then you can get to the kind of rating system, I think, that really makes more sense.
Yeah,
And sorry,
sorry.
a question, because I was not at the last meeting when you had these conversations. I guess the first question I have is, did Peter provide you with the spreadsheet that lists all the meeting rooms that we used in the study that we did in 2022?
I have not given that. The request at the point was really just to start with 2 or 3 different buildings at a time, go through the plans, talk to the people that take the reservations from there, and then go there. Are you referring to the one at the town campus?
No, well, I'm referring to the backup to the report that was done prior to the Academy referendum in 2022, and it was actually on the website. It was a utilization study. It was not thorough, but it does have a database of rooms, and it talks about amenities. Because
Was it part of the DRA study?
no, this is not the DRA study. This was done
Okay.
after that.
Yeah.
The DRA was a conditions assessment, right?
Yeah.
This actually was a download of the Outlook
Yeah.
meeting usage, and it included in it a list of major uses of now the data is old now, like way too old, because it was done, I think, in 2020, and then But there's a database that at least lists all the rooms, the amenities, and it rates them by like quality level in terms of amenities and, technology. And so that I just want, it might help you. I don't know if it was the best analysis, but it could be some helpful information to use.
Because it had,
I didn't even know that existed. All right.
Sounds have utilization.
Yeah, well, I've been taught, it's one of these things that was done and was available in 2022, and I keep asking it to be dug up, and I think they finally found it probably a month ago when we were pulling all the academy information ready for the referendum. It was done by Colliers, and it was, through Bill McMahon's office. So,
It is on the web.
so it was at one point, but I don't know if she pulled all the academy stuff down. So we need, Madison knows where it is now, but I will make sure that the committee gets that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the hours of operation. And I've had a lot of conversations with staff, about, there's demand and then there's availability based on hours of operation and staffing, right? And so at one point, I think we have to address the issue that we're not maximizing the space because of the staffing constraints and the hours of operation for these buildings. So as you go through, like the senior center is a perfect example. There's limitations because of how we staff it. And then there's limitations in terms of how we use it. The kitchen is a perfect example. We don't allow anybody to use the kitchen because the senior center feels they run it for Meals on Wheels and they run it for their lunch during the week. And so it's not allowed to be rented out. Now that's an operational decision by the head of the senior center, right? So I think it would be good as you go through these, and I'm just helping you, good questions to ask staff and how are the hours handled? Because I know Austin tries to add, if he has enough rentals requests for one night, he'll add on a custodial person, right? And make sure that he can accommodate that. But he's not going to do it if it's like a 1 hour meeting at 7 o'clock, that kind of thing. So I know you're professionals in this area, but I just want to make sure that as you go through the analysis, you kind of dig into that a little bit more and understand the scheduling. That's all.
And I'd just like to add, I think if we want to have a realistic blueprint for what space is available to the public for public use at what times, we need to also include the current use of each space and the current programmatic use of each space. And like, for example, there may be reasons why, and I think Peggy just brought up an example, we assume there's a kitchen here and a dining room, is it available for a group to rent? Or if they're a public, group or something, can they just, make an appointment to reserve the room or something and not have to pay for it, but, to have a dinner here? Well, if you can't have a dinner here because there are rules about the place, it doesn't matter that there's a kitchen.
Right.
And, there are all kinds of examples like that where a room might be set up for use for, a beach and rec program during the day, but they have to, like a robotics class, and they have to leave stuff in that room all day. So you really can't effectively use that as an evening meeting room because it's filled with robotics stuff, people's projects. So there has to be a qualitative, programmatic view. Also, I know everybody on Facebook, especially social media with the referendum we just had all kinds of opinions of, oh, this could be used for that and that could be used for that. But it doesn't take into account in any way, shape, or form what it really is already being used for and whether that proposed alternate use or additional use would be compatible or not.
So I guess the question, what I take away from this is that we have an analysis that says this is how everything's being used and why, but then say this is the potential of use. But are there opportunities to use it differently, or are there opportunities to, yeah,
And then the limitations.
yeah. What is the limiting factor? Is
But
it
that's
the-
where the
is it the
dialogues come
custodian?
in.
Yeah.
That's when
exactly.
we've got to meet with people, because we're not gonna get it off of plans, or we're not gonna get it off of DRA reports. And that's why I'm trying to put together a comprehensive questionnaire to sit down when I'm sitting down with these people. And one of them is, what is the function, what are the limitations of the rooms and usage and traffic? What I'm hoping that Nick and I can put together, and it's in the early stages, so you'll see it as it's birthing, and hopefully we can get it to where everybody feels comfortable with, is to get away from the assumptions and put the current situation in black and white. Because that also will feed into the rating system. So that when they look at it, they can see why this got rated this way or that way, or what is the disposition of this room, even though it's called cafe or cafeteria on a blueprint. What is it really, and how is it really used, or how is it really equipped? And same with the equipment in the meeting rooms.
I suspect we'll find out ultimately that we don't have as much available space as we think, because a lot of the spaces have uses that are not compatible with other uses,
Right.
you know?
And
I think there's, well, I was gonna say, I think I agree completely with what you're saying, because I think that as we go through this, but I also think that we need to look at how we're prioritizing users. One of the things that the study that I found was very interesting, one of the biggest users of space at the senior center is AA. They were the biggest booker of space, and they will come in and book out everything for the entire year, right? They'll book out their meetings, and they've just got that slot, and that slot stays. And so, it's not a criticism of the organization at all, but I'm just saying, like, one of the things the town needs to be better at, I think, is figuring out the prioritization of space, and the criteria for using a space. And then we've looked at pricing, obviously, because Academy leading up, we have done a lot of background work on how to look at pricing, and we're kind of woefully behind in that, I think, in terms of how we approach it. But I think it'll be really good to have this analysis done by, the committee to kind of, like you said, state where we are today and what the existing policies are, and then what the potential is. And some of it's changing the policy, some of it's changing use for rooms that might be better adaptable for other uses, So I think it would be a really good exercise. And I would suggest that the interviews, I think I wouldn't mind talking to you about who you're interviewing with, right? Because there's obviously the person who kind of controls the space at the high level, but then there's the boots on the ground, the receptionists, the people that are fielding the phone calls that are just saying, sorry, it's not available, right? And so they're kind of the front line, because we don't have one system that's transparent, for all our spaces, which is another thing we need to get to, right? We all agree we need better scheduling software and meeting room management, software. I think there's a lot more demand out there that we're just turning away at times because of our policies and our hours of operation. So.
Well, within that context, I mean, I would, when the interviews, I would suggest that we want to ask a couple kind of leading questions, like, I want to bring my baseball team in. Can we meet? Can we use this room? And how do I book it for you? Because I have a group of friends and we want to have a bridge club here. We want to do this. We want to. I would ask, like, how does that work? Because I think it's an interesting question.
Is it really first come, first served?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So and they'll flush it out. So I'm guessing that I mean, there's what, about 16 total different buildings, 16, 18 buildings we're talking about?
That we could use, yeah.
And then there's probably maybe 5 or 7 spaces in each of the buildings. So there's probably less than 100 spaces that we have to look at. All right, I mean, I understand at the outset.
I do have a question though, and this is just a bug in my ear. We're looking at Madison-owned properties right now and assessing what services they provide for the community. But it seems another part that we're not looking at, and I'm not sure whether we should look at just to get an idea, is the library.
Yeah, I think the
Because-
library is an interesting question.
But I don't know where to fit it since it's not a Madison town
But
property.
the
per
town
se.
does
It's a quasi-town property.
support it.
Quasi,
Because
yeah.
you support it.
I think the library should definitely be included in this, and especially since now it's been operating for 2 or 3 years, you know, it was closed back in, you know, it was under construction and then it opened during COVID. So I would definitely include the library. And then I think it would be good at one point to list, you know, have a list of all the other community spaces. There's the American Legion that was just recently renovated, and looking at how they charge and how they book out. And then there's Hubley Hall. They just invested in upgrading their kitchen, which is part of the Congregational Church, and they have a big community room. So I think it would be, you know,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of other spaces. There's not a lot, but there are spaces in town that,
What about like OLM?
Would they use, would that be open for the all space on,
I think OLM rents out, they rent their gym out. So, you know, and that's the other thing I don't know, but at one point we'll need to talk about the school spaces and the gym spaces, because one of the things that came out of, you know, all the academy conversations and the survey, and that was another thing I want to mention, that eventually when we talk about demand, right? That survey is a great assessment of what people would like to see in our town in terms of, you know, programming and things. But gym space is, you know, considered high demand, right? So, but OLM does rent out their gym. I don't know if they rent out other spaces. And then the country school rents their gym out. So schools are tough though, as Seth can speak to, because there's so much demands on the school buildings with programming and things change at the last minute. So they always have to bump people out, you know, which people don't like. And I know, Peter can talk a lot about that too. But there is other, and then the VFW is going to be going through a small renovation, their space. So there's a list of other spaces that we could certainly, as that can fulfill some of that overflow need, you know?
There's the bottom floor and the top floor of Memorial Town Hall. But I guess you're already studying that.
Yeah, that's part of a town building.
So
Yeah.
the
the $64 question here is, I'd like to put a time frame on preliminary results.
I know.
So, I mean, and in my view, at least I would suggest that this needs to get at least in a draft initial data review point in 2 to 3 months. And so if we can get it, and the question is,
Say 2 or 3
what other
months.
kind of resources will you need to get it done in that time frame? Because I mean, that's a big question about
part of the next
part of the meeting, is about resources for analysis and assessment stuff. So if we need more resources to bear on this, or, you know, different people to be part of it, we should. So I'd like you to think about that. If you can put that together, I don't think we can answer that at the moment, but because I'm thinking, you know, just in kind of pragmatic kind of timeframe things, you know, if we have something by mid to late summer, prior to when everybody starts rethinking and re-talking about this stuff in the fall, that would be very helpful.
I think that's something Nick and I will put our heads together. I think with the fact that you're offering possibility of more resources, it's identifying what kind of resources that we need. My feeling is, now that I've just started a Memorial Hall and the Senior Center, and I specifically chose those two because I felt they would be the most intense in terms of getting all the data, building wise and everything. I think it could be done within a 2.5,
Okay.
3, but I should
Because
talk to
that
Nick.
gentleman that you
I
helped
should
us
talk to Nick
get,
first.
Peggy, that gentleman that you.
Our Scrog assistant,
Yeah, I don't know if we can get more help from them or not, but he was really quite good.
That was in the back of my mind, but I thought.
I mean, that was the, like the Yukon program, and unfortunately they're graduating. So there is going to be 2 more interns coming on board, but it's going to be August, September timeframe. So I don't have a summer person. We could, you know,
In the schools.
Can we get anybody that's a junior, or senior, that's,
Boy, this-
you know, that could be a resource that we could bring from within our school system? You know, if we talk,
We're talking
I
about
can-
this.
It's late.
no, I know, but I mean, we're talking
Maybe we
pay them over the summer and they'd have an internship for June or July.
Probably the best thing is to determine what kind of resource we would like, or
Yeah.
what we would be putting this
Why don't you
resource
talk,
to
right,
do.
let's
Yeah.
step
So
back,
they
you
can
guys
bring it
decide
back
what
about-
you need
Because
first.
it may end up that it's just easier that we do it ourselves. I mean, I'm almost done with the senior center and starting a memorial hall,
Okay,
except for the conversation with Austin,
Mhm.
but I can't do that. Part of it is also summer is family visiting and vacation.
right,
So that's
understand.
the other thing that comes into play. But let Nick and I talk about it. It may be we don't need it, or we'll specify what type of resource that we would like to have.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, there's a lot of talent in this town. You know, both people that work here as well as people that are, you know, live here. And, you know, we might as well shoot to use it. You know, I suspect we run up the flag on the type of talent we need and people will say yes. I mean, people do
I mean,
volunteer.
we could put out a internship out, you know, it could be unpaid even, but it's work. I don't know about paid. I'd have to figure out how we would fund it. But, you know, if it's listed, need assistance, you know, if it's just more data collection and spreadsheet building and that kind of stuff, I would think we could throw something out there and just see if there's some either college kids that could do this, you know.
It sounds like a good Eagle Scout project to me,
No,
seriously.
good idea.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all right.
Anybody interested in architecture or civil
Yeah.
engineering or something like that?
Sure.
This would be a fun project.
Public administration, anything like that.
Okay. Right. So
Nick
for-
and I'll put our
if
heads
you could put your heads
together.
together and, you know, maybe send something out between now and next meeting, because you know, if we can start moving things along with extra resources and stuff, might as well work on it between now and next meeting, you know, rather than wait till the next meeting to approve things. So,
But I'd
Outstanding
also
reason.
like to make sure that we have a definitive list of the properties we're looking at, so we don't forget one or
Mhm.
we miss one. So I'm gonna,
well, I
I'll
agree.
put a list together.
Okay, put a list together and let's go over it, but, you know, before we, I mean, I agree we should look at the library and the VFW and other places like that, but, at this stage, I
This
mean,
is our priority.
let's put the priority on the town buildings first and then move on to those as a second step.
What, are you saying to use the library in a second step? Because I should think that that would be part of the.
The library's the one I would
Maybe
maybe
not, I would not say, but I mean, you know, but I mean, if we talk about the Grange or the VFW or those, I
Right.
think,
go through secondary.
but at the library, because it's so integrated with the town, I think that probably makes sense.
It's not paid for use like these other places are that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the good thing a library is they do actually have software that you can easily, you know. And I think it was already FOIA'd by people in the community. And so I think we can easily get some data in terms of, that's different than obviously talking to them and about the usage and stuff, but at least get some data pretty quickly and easily on it.
The library have experience with that kind of stuff. They may be good resources too. to talk.
Exactly.
Maybe true, right?
Okay. All right, anything else on that? Okay, then let's move on. Next item on the agenda is the discussion on our priorities now that the Academy referendum is completed. Obviously, we'll be moving in a different direction now that it's been rejected versus if it was approved. So in general, I'll open it up, but in my view at least, it would be important to understand the programs that will not be addressed as a result of the Academy referendum being rejected, and then saying, you know, so we understand that. I think we've already set a lot of our targets, if you will, through the interim report. We got in front of that, thankfully. So before we get into, this kind of combines to the second item on the budget. It seems to me we have to do some feasibility analysis on the various spaces in town rather than automatically jump and say, we want to do this to this building. And we should probably tell you what is feasible to do in these various buildings. So, and it seems to me that there are two kind of key spots that we have to analyze. And one is Memorial Town Hall. Second is, actually, I say there's three spots. Memorial Town Hall, Jeffrey, obviously, is the second biggest issue. And the third issue, to some degree, I think, is what's going to happen with Academy ultimately, and whether or not part of it will be saved or all of it will be demoed, or what's going to happen with that space. Could you do something there as well if you can't utilize in some of the other spaces? So it seems to me that we're the interim report could really kind of just laid out. I mean, the couple things that were not in the interim report that I think are going to become more important for us to understand are the what's going to happen at the surf club and what are some of the plans for the surf club. I think we need to have some better understanding of the Lesage property next to Jeffrey and how those two parcels may interact to one another to create a more strategic outcome for that area. I think the third issue is how do we understand the potential reuse of Ryerson or not, and in terms of really understanding its feasibility rather than is it a full demolition, is it a partial demolition, is it not a demolition, is it a potential reuse of space to solve some of these needs. So to me, it seems that we really have to create a budget and identify some people to come in and give us some guidance on feasibility at this stage. What is this building like? What's its condition? What can be done with it? And we're really focusing on I think a handful of spaces at this stage.
So can I just say, my understanding is that the Board of Selectmen, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peggy, my understanding is that the Board of Selectmen, possibly in conjunction with the Board of Finance, want to take primary responsibility, I guess is a way to put it, for determining what goes on with the Academy property. Now, I say property, I mean the building, but also the land. And so I think that's an initial determination that if we can understand that better, we know whether we're proceeding as a committee with having to figure out the feasibility for the Academy property or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think the board very much said at our last meeting that we're going to be leading the process of what the next steps are. So we're going through first some just due diligence on, because we have outstanding bonds relating to the building. We have grants that are tied to the community center we need to make sure that, those are going to go away, which they probably will, but we want to understand all that. And then we are also going to move forward to at least get an estimate of what demolition would look like. So we have some cost parameters around demolition. I think that the messaging that came out of the community is that the town doesn't want to bear the burden of the cost of renovating that building. And whether you wanted a community center or you wanted an office building or something else, it's still going to cost a lot of money to renovate it, no matter what the use is. So I think that the board is probably going to step back and talk about, do we look at, putting it out for RFP for housing or for other, there's a lot of ideas around, right? Commercial space, make it another Faneuil Hall or, all this other stuff. But the reality is that whatever use that goes towards, it's going to cost a lot of money to renovate it. So we're going to be talking about that the next month or two. And then there was a lot of discussion, obviously, towards leading up to the referendum about just demolishing it, creating amphitheater space, saving the front end of the building, just taking off the end. So it is going to be a broader conversation. I think, though, for this committee, to me, the one issues that comes out of this failing is that we don't have we don't have space for youth and family addressed. This building was supposed to expand youth and family that was identified in the DRA. That was identified as a need, and that's why we moved it to Academy. So they have 3,000 square feet. They need 6,000 square feet. So to me, that should be a priority discussion, for alternative homes, if it's expanding their building, if it's moving them to another building, like Jeffrey or somewhere else. So I think in that context, there's, something that came out of the referendum that's a clear, we need a home for youth and family now, or somehow have to address their space needs.
So that would be the subject of this committee.
Exactly.
Whereas
I think
academy
so.
itself will be the subject
Right.
of
Right.
the first selectman.
I mean, one of the things I think the lessons learned over the last 15 years of what's happened to this town is 20 years or more, is too many decisions were isolated and made as one view. You looked at one issue and you made a decision on that one issue. And I think, the whole point of this committee was not to do that, was to say, how do we look at the whole town and kind of integrate things so that it makes more sense, so that you're not, so for example, in my view, at least we should be thinking about the various parcels that we talked about that might be developed for whether housing or commercial spaces. We should be looking at the feasibility of those and coming up with, hiring people that can tell us what can be built there and giving us some kind of context so that we can say, this is the potential tax revenue that can be generated that can offset some of the other costs of doing these other kinds of renovations, but kind of keeping it more comprehensive. One of the things I did the other day was, because I was just curious, because my history with the Academy project goes deep, as you all know. And so I have a lot of affection for that building. And I was looking at it, and every time the Academy building came up for discussion, there was another building project in the town that took priority. And it got put to the back burner. I was kept on asking myself, why in the world, since 2004, has this kept being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed for 20 years? And if you think about it, it was, the police station pushed it, the new high school pushed it, the library pushed it,
Yeah.
senior
I
center
think a
pushed
big
it.
reason for that is because there's so many different things you can do.
Yeah,
Talking about building a high school, it's for a high school. If you're
Right.
talking about building a police station, it's
Exactly.
for a police
Very
station. When you're
specific.
talking about repurposing academy.
Yeah.
It's an endless discussion.
my point is that if we can take a step back and get a broader sense of feasibility on a lot of different things, then we can understand and we can say, all right, one time a guy told me, he says, we're not making puzzles, we're using Legos. The big thing about difference between Legos and puzzles is puzzles, I give you all the straight pieces, I give you all the blue pieces, I give you all the green pieces, and everybody puts their parts together and then all of a sudden it all fits. Well, Legos, every time you put them together, you get a different shape, and so we're really
They hurt
dealing
when
with,
you step on them.
yeah, so we're really dealing with
We all know
Legos
that.
here, not puzzles. There's not a definitive answer here. We don't really understand what the shape is going to be.
Yeah.
So we really have to understand what the potential capabilities of these different spaces are.
Are you suggesting that maybe if we can get a committee budget, that we should look outside and maybe have a professional study
Yeah.
done?
So for example, one of the things I did this past, last couple of weeks is I went, because Memorial Town Hall will be a subject of analysis. Can it be restored to its original structure as a theater, basically, which is what it was, and solve the issue. Well, so back when I was involved in 1990, before the purchase of the town campus, there was, Roth and Moore did a design for Memorial Town Hall and how it could be renovated to become the office for the town offices. And they have a very elaborate thing that was in addition to it and all this other stuff, but they obviously looked at the building and have some understanding. So Roth and Moore's out of business. They're done. Both of the two principals have, one is passed and one is retired. But the successor company is David Thompson and Associates. So David Thompson Architects, and he's very well renowned. Actually, I ended up working with him on several other projects at other college campuses over the years. I talked to him the other day. He still has all the records. So for example, when I talked to him about, you know, and we'll have to obviously get guidance from Peggy and others on how the procurement stuff would work, but would that be a good firm to come in since they have experience with that building? And he was part of that process back in 1990 to come in and say what could be done with that building. And you know, and I'm talking, you know, a $5,000 to $10,000 level of commission to have a professional come in and look at it and say, this is what we think we could do. You know, and or a designer that could do a similar kind of thing for Jeffrey, or someone else that can deal with something for, you know, for wave your hands. You know, maybe we should have a standing meeting. That would solve the problem. But anyway, so my point is that, you know, and that's just like, you know, when you talk about these feasibility things, a person that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and I know he's well respected in the town, is Mike Harkin, who's a civil engineer, and he's done a tremendous amount of civil and engineering, and you know, he understands. He's well respected at the state. He's well respected here in town, and he really understands wetlands, and he understands what you can build and where you can build it, and he's very good at those kinds of things. You know, potentially using him for all these open spaces that we're talking about, and if we can, how can they be reused, or how can they be more effective? So I think if we identify, and I was thinking, Nick, you must know several people who'd be very good at looking at a place like that. And my thinking is that we really don't want to retain an architect per se, because they tend to start designing quickly and costs go crazy. We really want to kind of, you know, is there some way
Keep it conceptual.
that you can bring in resources from Gilbane potentially, for example, that can bring the building perspective in, so that you create a team that says, okay, we really, you know, we gotta hold the reins tightly on this thing so it doesn't run away on us, and so that we can get some kind of concepts, and because ultimately we're talking 8 or 10 different initiatives here.
Yeah.
So what you really want to do is be able to get through all that in a relatively short period of time, and then say, all right, pull it back and say which ones are the highest priority, and why, or which way it would make sense.
But what I haven't really seen, other than in your interim report and in our discussions, is a comprehensive list of where the current needs are. What are the needs? What is the community wanting? What were they hoping to accomplish with the academy building? And we know youth and family services needs to expand. What other things are right now on the agenda as a identified need, so that once we go into the feasibility possibilities of what we're doing, that we don't lose track of what was there to begin with, what was identified as a need.
Well, we need to give.
That's what the advisory
give them
committee
An
did.
objective.
I mean, the
That's
advisory
good,
committee
Dave.
did that. So that, I'm just saying that was one, it was a survey and it was meetings with different, so the advisory committee, Academy Advisory Committee, there's a report that's available online that's very detailed, that does at least go through what people felt was needed, right? And that Academy was supposed to meet those needs. You know,
That's
Okay.
So that's a starting point, though, of looking at it and understanding what people felt we weren't getting in town, from other facilities. It's not perfect science, but it was they had over 1,000 people responded to that. And they also interviewed a lot of different organizations about what they would like to see in the space so they could come and provide their services or provide the programming. So
What
that
you have to do is watch the fly-through. I mean, the fly-through is very well done, and it tells you exactly what all the different spaces are and what are the demands.
And we definitely need to concentrate on Jeffrey, because the way I see it, Jeffrey itself could serve
There's a
a lot of
fly-through that they
purposes.
did for,
For the
I'm sorry,
Academy
for
fly-through.
Academy. It does it's an
Conceptual.
architectural conceptual thing, and it drives you through the building and it shows you all the
Virtual
spaces.
reality.
Virtual reality,
Oh,
yeah.
where can we
So,
see that one?
It's read online
It's right
on the Academy.
This is the first I've heard of it, so.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but I mean,
So
it
the
is-
website leading up to the referendum had the virtual
Yeah.
walkthrough, it had the floor plans, it had the academy study, it had the space utilization plan.
Everything in one.
I mean, there's a lot of information that was used to build up to the plan for academy. So that should all be stuff that Peter will make sure that you get that package of information. And that kind of,
I've downloaded the plans. I've gone through the whole.
Yeah, we don't need to
detailed plans.
we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's take a lot of that work that was already done, and then we can compare it to look at Jeffrey.
With the,
We own Jeffrey, we own the land under Jeffrey. We could look at a concept of taking down the temporary classrooms that are not usable anymore. Maybe expanding it needs more parking there, and then you can do some combination of town offices. You can, including Madison Youth and Family Services. There's a gym.
Right.
For camp use for beaches and rec. There's a small, but at least as big as the stage that they were doing with Academy. There's a stage and a performance area where you can put chairs in the cafeteria, make it an auditorium. There's a lot of different classrooms where you can teach stuff. It almost becomes a replacement almost as it stands. Now, for office space, it's going to need to be converted because it's classroom space now. Other than the administrative offices.
From a square footage standpoint,
Yeah.
it's roughly equivalent to the Academy space.
So that might be one of the things that we stress for the feasibility study is, what can we salvage from the Academy concept and, put it at Jeffrey, for example.
How far along is the surf club plan, Peggy? I guess.
they're just, I think the RFP is due, might be this week, in terms of proposals. And then, so they still haven't even hired anybody. And then, that process will start.
But they have a program concept, right? I assume. If they're gonna hire somebody, they must have a program concept already.
So this is to actually do a feasibility study about what can be done, because you've got a lot of complications obviously down there with the building and being in a flood zone. And so it's kind of, they wanted to start out very broad and bringing somebody in, this is phase one of that process to kind of assess what are the limitations, what is it being used for currently? So this is going to be a timely, I know there's a lot of discussion about the surf club, but this is going to be a long conversation, right? Because you have to deal with the building and grounds facility, athletic fields, the beach, the building is limited. And then you have to then we have to go through a public outreach about what do people want from this? I know you have the people who think that we should have some, wedding venue that brings in a lot of revenue. And then you have people that want to keep their small town beach and don't want to be overrun by events all the time at the surf club. So I think that's going to be a big discussion as we go out. I think there's also, we need a secondary exit, in and out of the facility. That's going to impact ball fields, so it's another, I would put it as complicated as Academy, for us to kind of figure that out.
I'm thinking that we really, though, need to focus on, I mean, right now, on my sense is that we should have some kind of resources that can do the feasibility analysis that's both partially space and architectural and partially operational. Construction management, if you will, for Memorial Town Hall, Jeffrey and Ryerson. So those three buildings we need to really look at.
Well, also what about the current building? Just to add a wrinkle, the current building for Madison Youth and Family Services is that small building between the
Powder
academy
house.
and the Powder House. And I mean, one option is just expand that, especially if we're tearing down academy. If that happens, then there's more space to potentially expand that.
And then the other thing would be to have someone that can be retained to do land evaluation. What is not,
Yeah.
what is used,
Yeah.
what could be done with this space? Is it this 20 acres, is this 5 houses, is this 20 houses? Is it a good spot for affordable housing? Is it a good spot for, condos? Is it a good spot for, commercial space?
Is it feasible to put a multi-family water system and septic system under it?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of, so, I mean, it seems to me that we would need to retain, and I'm not sure, probably we're talking 3 or 4 different professionals at this stage to retain.
What were the initial three? You were saying Memorial Hall, Jeffries, and
Ryerson and the
Ryerson.
Powder House, obviously, and then the fourth issue would be the land evaluation. So the building issues would be Memorial Town Hall, Jeffrey, Ryerson, Powder House. And then land evaluations would be the,
just out of curiosity, why the Powder House?
well, it's because the Youth and Family Services is potentially leaving.
Oh,
So if they can
Oh.
stay there, you've expanded. If they can't stay there, you're gonna have to move them anyways. Even if you do a renovation, you're gonna move them and temporarily house them someplace else and then move them back. So it's a question of, is that the right kind of space for them or not? And what can be done with that space? Make sense? So it's ultimately a question of if we identify, we should be preparing some sort of statement of need. Peggy, that would outline that we can go out to vendors with and bid it, or do we have to bid all these, or is there a certain dollar threshold if we can keep it under that we don't have to go through? Or you were mentioning to me earlier about a group of approved contractors or approved vendors.
We have an on-call engineer list and we have an on-call, I don't know if the architecture list has been finalized, and it's through the Council of Government. So it's been kind of like the state bid list, right? So we don't have to vet them. We're okay using them for procurement purposes. They've already had negotiated rates done. So we have an engineering list. I think the architecture list was in the process of getting finalized. So I can find that information out. I think I'm trying to remember for professional services, if it's anything over 5,000, I think we have to go out and get 3 quotes.
Yeah.
And if it's over 10, is it that we have to go out to bid?
At least 25.
Okay. So, so we got to get quotes, this is a public dollars and public process. And so, I think if we identify what our needs are, but like I said, if it's on the on-call list, then we don't have to. We can hire somebody off the on-call list. So I just have to find out where we are with the architectural one.
But if we let's say we identified, let's say
just go.
5 architectural firms, and gave them all 3 or 4 of these projects and said, give us separate, what's your hourly rates for, which if you had them that way, could you pick 3 out of the 5 and go forward that way? Because they can expedite the process that way.
Well, I think part of the public procurement is going to be, you can go out for a request for proposal, and you have to make it public. So you're going to have to offer this out to anybody, not just picking 5 that you choose. And then once you get your request for, or design your scope of work, you could set out a request for proposal and then wait for these people to come to you.
Okay.
Then with a request for proposal, you can kind of vet out what your best design is and go with 1 or 3 people in
Yeah,
there.
you don't have to go with the lowest bidder in that type of process.
Yeah, so if you put it out as a bid, you're gonna get its lowest bidder.
But let me ask this, like logistically, if we're trying to keep each one low and have 3 separate contracts, are we cutting off our nose to spite our face in that if we were to get one
No,
company that
You
does,
only want one, yeah. You
you know,
don't wanna
one
get
company
3.
that has the broad spectrum, can do architectural,
Yep.
land use, and like all that.
Yeah,
stuff,
and they'll
right?
probably
Feasibility.
end up like looping in other people, but
Yeah.
there'll be one person that, those groups are generally like planners,
Yeah,
and then they have access to all the other trades.
yeah, because otherwise, I mean, if you have, you know, 3 separate
I'm sorry. I'm
teams
not-
doing it, then you, yeah.
So you're gonna pull
Like
3
working
that are
across
that are your
purposes.
best average, taking the high and the low away.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I think you'd be amazed at how little departments talk in the same company.
yeah.
Different
It's something
design
else,
firms
yeah.
that have architecture.
the other thing that we found too is that
And competitive, they don't talk and they're competitive.
we had one which we picked up on. It was supposed to be an all one in-house, so design build. And they kind of looped around it by working together with different contractors, but calling it a design build company. And it was like, I know this guy, he doesn't work for you.
I think it's worth taking a look at who's in that on-call list and see if there's any.
Yeah, let's take a look at that.
Really
But
comes down to the
we could
people
also
that you're
do
dealing
assign, you know, you could have a prime that you assign other people to
Yeah,
too. So we could assign, like
Yeah.
if we wanted a land use engineer that we really have confidence in, we could.
they've already, the people that they have on the off-call, they've already gone through RFPs, they've already vetted them out, they've already chosen as their person. We do that all the time in
Yeah.
the facility
I
department.
think the one downside to the on-call list is that it's a time and material.
Yeah.
So it's billable hours.
Yeah.
If you put out an RFP, you'll get hourly rates just, for information, but you're defining the
Total
scope.
cost.
And you're asking them to fulfill it.
Yeah, but unfortunately, there's no real definition for what we want here. So, you know,
That's the thing.
there's no, if we go out and ask for a definitive price, the prices are going to be astronomical.
Understood, but if
Yeah.
you just take someone off the on-call without a definitive scope, they're just gonna be, that meter's just gonna be
Billable
spent.
hours.
I know the meter spins, it's a management issue.
I think what we could do though is we could loosely define, here's the 4 or 5 properties that we want included in the feasibility study. We want to cap it at, $100,000, whatever it is, and then, seek bids.
I also think you can narrow down the scope.
Yeah, I mean, you could just
Yeah,
say
if you
that,
get a scope.
You
for,
can do the scope.
you know,
You can narrow it
for
down.
150 hours, what can you tell us? You go and look at this bill.
We can
No,
tell you
I'm
the
serious.
name of
You
our
know,
company.
you can certainly do it. I mean, I've done it that way where you say, basically, here, guys, you got a meter going. And, and they know if you create it in the right way, that they know there's a
Not
second.
to exceed.
Right. But they got another opportunity to come in to do a further design. They tend to give you more hours than they bill you for, if you do it right. All right, well, so Peggy, if you can give us that call list of different people, maybe, is there somebody I should meet with? Should I just spend time with Peter or somebody else about?
I think, Peter, you just have to, there's a call list, I know for sure for engineering services, because we've used it, and I think because we've used like Stantec, they're on the on-call list.
Yeah.
I think Tecton might even be, I would talk to John Anako and Rob Russo, they'll know
Okay.
what the COG has put out. I just don't know where they were on like the actual architect. They were also going to do a landscape architect one too, I think.
That's out right now for us.
Yeah, we have that out right now. Actually, yeah, we
For
already.
the town, okay, you're doing your
Yeah.
own. We've been
Yeah.
writing off of, because the COG had a panel that kind of did this with all the
Okay.
different towns, so that way it saved everybody a lot of work, and then they voted, and then our board needs to just vote to accept the list. I just don't know where we were on the architect one, so.
Civil engineering firms with specialties in wetlands and septics and that kind of stuff and wells is really important.
Western Stanton, I thought we had Western Stanton.
So,
Guys, I don't know that there's from my perspective, a ton of advantage to having a civil and an architectural under the same umbrella. There are not a lot of firms that do, and you just mentioned why I wouldn't hire, so. I do think civil and architectural are split up enough that there's minimal coordination there.
But I'm saying get them both.
Get them both, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, they're different. I mean, I wouldn't, like, I mean, the civil, I'm not sure we need a civil for Jeffrey, for example. You know, we do need a civil for the open vacant lands.
Well, remember the DRA study, they went through with engineers in the building. So I feel like there doesn't need to be a lot of like engineering in terms of the building, because that's,
It's not so much that as much as the planning side about what could you do with this space?
right, okay.
You know, that, and it's also, what are the requirements that you need to fulfill when you do renovate this? So Jeffrey, you're gonna put in a sprinkler system at $6 a square foot. You're gonna bring it up to ADA requirements, you're gonna bring it up to
Yeah.
current code and egress requirements. So right off the bat, if you do nothing but just
Just have a
renovate
shell. You're
as
gonna
it
have-
is, you're gonna spend
That's
X number of
$1,000.
And that's what we face with Academy, you know, the change in debate about the change of use, because you have assembly space, office space, you know, kitchen space. I mean, and that was part of the code issues that we were struggling with, which social media went completely overboard on that. But the reality is that when you have a multi-purpose space, you come up against all these code issues and, to your point, and what's going to be required. So that's why community center is not going to, you know, at Jeffrey because it will still have the same problems in terms of what's going to be made.
If you keep the building up, part of the problem with Academy was it was mothballed.
Structural.
And so when you bring it back up, it's got to be up to modern code. Does that have to happen like if we never close Jeffrey? We're turning the keys over from the Board of Ed to the Board
So
of Select
what are you gonna do it, are you gonna keep it a
in
school?
January. No, so if it's a new use, you have to bring it up
Yeah,
to
you're gonna
code.
have to
too.
let's change the whole thing.
Because it's the value of the work process that you're
Yeah.
gonna be doing in the building that's going to determine what codes are gonna kick.
And by the way, all our schools have asbestos in them, so all this talking about asbestos in Academy. No, but that's good, that's just the reality of anything built in that era, right? So all of, you know, so we're gonna have to deal with any all of the same issues with Jeffrey once we try to use it for something else. Obviously, it won't be as deteriorated as Academy was, but it's still gonna cost.
And part of the evaluation also needs to be a timeline. If you were gonna do something with Jeffrey,
Right.
what does that look like in terms of time? Because money is gonna need to be spent. If it's not gonna get touched for 3 years,
Yeah.
it needs a roof, it needs
You
new
don't
care.
wanna go back.
We don't want to go back to Academy. It wasn't just that it was mothballed and
Yeah.
it changed use. It was that the roof had leaked,
Deteriorated,
the
yeah.
exterior walls had leaked. They created a lot of challenges for the design team, cost more.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey, we know the issues because it's in the DRA report with the boiler. And the roof is leaking, so there's gonna be, that's already been identified. So we should definitely go back and look at DRA, or was it the one that was done, Seth, by the Board of Ed before that, the facility study that dates back to?
DRA didn't have details on, they identified a lot of things, but they didn't have a cost structure, so it's in the Board of Ed one.
That's
Yeah.
the piece of-
Board of
you
Ed
said-
one. Yeah,
Yeah, 10-year maintenance, plan of maintenance.
yeah, okay.
All right. All right, so I'll work with Peter on that issue and
Did you take those two? You have those two, now, right?
I have the two binders.
Okay.
okay, any other comments on this issue?
It's a small issue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my goal on all these things is to break it down into smaller tasks, because if you look at it, try to accomplish everything at once, it gets overwhelming and it gets way too big.
Definitely, that
So,
overwhelming was the word.
yeah, and so by breaking it down to smaller tasks, and I think we're gonna have to, each of us are gonna have to kind of oversee one of these projects as we get into it, I mean, I know you're gonna be working on the utilization stuff, but at the same token, we all have experience on,
Yeah.
in the building world. All all four of us here. So, you know, each of us are going to want to grab one of these and watch it.
Sure.
It's part of this whole effort.
Well, I think too, it's because of our experience, when we take this data, it will be with the viewpoint of where this data is going to go and how this data is going to be used. I think that's what I'm hoping, like Nick and I will accomplish, and
Well, one of the things I think we should do as part of this RFP is we should basically be very straightforward on it and say that, you know, basically based on, because of the program for Academy is not going forward, and these were the programmatic issues that the Academy had, what do you think of that program can be done in this space?
correct,
That's part of the question.
that would be very
And,
specific.
you know, and it should be, this is the program that, you know, so we basically list the Academy program or those needs and say, what are the triggers in terms of code, functionality, utilization, and over what time frame could it be done?
Yeah, I mean, part of the
And
problem.
at what cost?
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing.
But part of the problem is we may also at some point need to peel back, because while there were studies done in connection with the Academy as a community center project by the advisory committee, you know, it seems to me like some, you know, the voters might have been saying, we don't necessarily need that wide a range of stuff in town.
Right.
So, you know, it'd be great if we could take the plan for Academy, put it at Jeffrey, and it costs like $10 million less. Poof, we're done. But that's not realistic. That's not what's gonna happen. So,
Um,
But isn't there a bigger picture here too? Is to look at everything that Madison has and how we can make Madison more efficient
yes.
in its use.
Yeah,
Yes, we do have the Academy building situation, not going, what's happening with what was deemed to go into Academy, but also looking at everything.
Well, that's the Lego piece.
That's it.
That's the
Yeah.
utilization piece, bringing in with all these building analysis piece and saying, do we really need all the space or not?
Or how can it be better used?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, basically, that's our function, bring it all together into one set of recommendations.
but again, I come back to, unfortunately, we're gonna learn that we do need more space to do most of the things that we want. Maybe not everything we want, but most of the things that most of the town wants, we're gonna need more space, and it's gonna cost money. May not be, you know, $24 million, but it's not gonna be cheap.
Yeah, for sure.
And what I've noticed from what I've read, people are very concerned about money spent in looking into what can be done, like the RFPs and
Social
construction.
media
Because
mentioned that.
So-
one of the
so you're-
things that I
yeah.
keep seeing is how much money was spent just on the plans for the Academy.
Yeah, but if you don't plan, then, you know,
Well,
you know,
right.
those
But I'm
size
just saying,
peas,
there
right?
seems to
Yeah,
be
that's
some-
why my core question is how, if we're looking at better use of existing land that changes the tax base, that potentially is revenue generation, how does that offset the potential capital requirements that we have? So I mean, that's the one piece that was never part of, that's not usually part of these discussions, I should say.
And we can't overemphasize into paralysis what, you know, maybe a minority of the voters were telling us. Most of the voters, I think, were basically saying, it's too much right now. It's too expensive right now. It's more expensive than we thought it was gonna be by a substantial amount. We dig the project, but we don't dig it at that price. And so, you know, we can't allow a no vote, even by a significant margin, to scare us into paralysis on things that town really does need.
I agree.
I think that there is just a lot of uncertainty out there right now, right? And so I think if this committee can create some sort of clarity and certainty and put parameters around thing and help the decision-making process, I think, because it is like you said, it's overwhelming. Like there's a myriad of options available to us, right? So And we heard that from the public about even just one building, Academy, right? So, and here we've got like 10 of them we got to figure out. So I think the more we can be thoughtful, transparent and show that we're being like professional about the approach and not emotional about the approach. Because I think that was also something that a lot of people criticized Academy about. It was more about people's emotions about the building and not about, the data, right? And so I think all the information, the data gathering, facts, doing all that will help us perhaps, weather this a little bit with the public. But it's going to be a rocky road no matter what we do, because everybody's going to have their own personal opinions about what they think is the right thing to do. Because everybody in this town is an expert, as I've learned. So they're all experts.
But another thing I think that I think the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance can emphasize while we're going through feasibility studies is to remind the electorate and taxpayers that we have plans in place. We have a bonding cap. We have the MIP, Madison Investment Plan, and other mechanisms that we can use. We have good bonding rate. So we have other mechanisms that we can use along with planning to keep something we need moving forward without killing people in taxes. I just think that, that's not our job as a committee.
Right.
I'm just saying, as a committee, we're going to face a lot of flack and static if there's not a supportive kind of reminder of that.
Well, one of the questions I have is, since there was already monies that were approved and bonded for Academy, can we use some of those resources, modest amounts that we need from that funding source to do these feasibilities? Because then you're basically saying, hey, we're talking about looking at the programs that you wanted to put here. Money was already approved. Can we use some of that
We
money?
may not be able to because the bonding.
That's part of the due diligence that you're talking about, right, Peggy?
Yeah, that's what the board has to talk to our bond counsel about, because this was voted on and bonds were issued with a prospectus. Representations were made to investors. So we have to go through the process of what is allowable, and can we change the scope of how the funds are being used? So we're going to talk to them. I mean, it may require another vote, right? Because there's resolutions that people voted for these bond funds to be used for this project. That hasn't gone away. We still have approval for $15.9 million for Academy, for the Academy Community Center. When the public voted last week, they did not vote to unwind that $15.9 million. All that we were asking was, can we take the grants and put them on top of the budget versus taking it off the bonding? So, because the resolutions required us to have any grants received to go against bonding. So that was what that referendum was about. So, but the problem is you can't, for $15.9 million, build a community center. That's why we had to go out to ask this question, because we heard from the market that the cost of renovating that building was going to be, just for baseline renovation, was going to be more than $15.9 million. So, well, that's part of the due diligence. To Jude's point, we're getting this all vetted to figure out exactly what approvals would need to be required, and how we could use those funds. Because and to Seth's point, look, we've issued more than $40 million in debt in the last 2 years, and we've still kept the mill rate growing below inflation. So we have a plan. We've been managing this all very well. And I keep encouraging me, the Madison Investment Plan. It's a 5-point plan. There's different strategies about how we're doing it. Part of it was using grant money, which we never went after for, so that Madison's not paying for 100% of the cost. Madison's paying for, 50 or 25% of the cost. So that is part of the long-term financial planning that we've been doing. So we've already issued $6 million to cover Academy, and the initial read from the bond council was, you're just going to have to use that to pay down debt every year. Well, that's dumb, because now we're earning, and we're limited on where we can invest that money. So we're earning 1% or 0.25% on the, issued bonds. And then we have to pay interest for 3 whatever percent. So So we're trying to see if we can navigate that, or if we might have to go out to referendum to get permission to allocate it for something else. So those questions will be answered in the next month or two. And that will give us a better sense of like what our options are for that. And then if we have to go for permission to use it in a different way, then we'll have to figure that timeline out. The next referendum is November. So that would be the next time the public could vote on that. So it's not easy. But I think for the studies that you're talking about, we do have a planning reserve. And then we do have some pockets of money in the different departments for advisory type things too. So that's why understanding how much this would cost and then how much we could use from the planning reserve, to cover some of it. That, there are some funds available. I think that we have over $150,000 probably in the planning reserve, so there are some other things that are earmarked for that too. But, that could help get us going at least, right, with the planning reserve.
Okay. Great. Any other new business? Any other things you guys want to raise? Okay, are there any public comments? Do we have anybody?
There's no one online.
Okay. All right, well, with that, I'll give a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and I'll get that other data that I was talking about at Academy sent out.
Thank you, Ted.